Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor today of welcoming to London this great assembly of delegates of the United Nations.
We are here to celebrate UNGA at 80, when delegates from 51 countries came together in this hall for the very first session of the General Assembly. To reach this hall, delegates had to pass through a city scarred by war. Throughout the Blitz, as many as 2,000 people gathered in the basement of the Methodist Central Hall, one of the largest public air raid shelters in London. This hall is a physical representation of what the United Nations is, a place people put their face for peace, for security, and for a better life.
A choice is offered to mankind. Twice in my lifetime, a war has brought untold sorrow. Should there be a third world war, the long upward progress towards civilization may be halted for generations, and the work of myriads of men and women through the centuries be brought to naught.
Many of the founding 51 states knew almost nothing but suffering and despair. 2 world wars in a generation, 70 million dead. The horrors of the Holocaust revealed to our collective shame. Nagasaki and Hiroshima obliterated. Over 700 million, nearly a third of humanity back then, still under colonial rule.
80 years ago, humanity escaped the horror by establishing international law and building multilateral institutions. But those protections only work if we choose to uphold them. While it is often the least powerful nations and the most vulnerable people who suffer first when global cooperation breaks down, history shows us that it is only a matter of time before everyone suffers. Last century taught us this lesson at an unbearable cost. Must we really learn it the hard way again?
We meet in challenging times, but if our predecessors could emerge from devastation with the resolve to chart a better path forward, how can we credibly argue that we are incapable of doing the same? The story of the United Nations was never one of simple victories, nor was it built for easy tasks. It was built from the beginning by and relied on those who were steering against unimaginable heavy headwinds. Remember the black and white grainy video with crackling sound? But at the end, a crystal clear voice from the then British Prime Minister Clement Attlee.
We must, we will succeed.
In spite of those who called them naive or pure idealists, we now know that they did succeed.
For 8 decades, the General Assembly has been the place the world comes together to help advance peace, promote sustainable development, and safeguard human rights. By its nature, the work of the General Assembly may not always be straightforward or seamless, but it is a mirror of our world, its divisions and its hopes. If this period has taught us anything, is that our challenges are ever more borderless and ever more interconnected. And the only way to address them is together. And that requires a robust, responsive, and well-resourced multilateral system. Yet, as we speak, that system is under threat. 2025 was a profoundly challenging year for international cooperation and the values of the UN. Aid was slashed, inequalities widened, climate chaos accelerated, international law was trampled, crackdowns on civil society intensified, we see powerful forces lining up to undermine global cooperation. Last year, the UN reported that global military spending reached $2.7 trillion. As the planet broke its records, fossil fuel profits continue to surge. And in cyberspace, algorithms rewarded falsehoods, fueled hatred, and provided authoritarians with powerful tools of control. Yet, despite these rough seas, we sail ahead. The world of 2026 is not the world of 1946. As global centers of power shift, we have the potential to build a future that is either more fair or more unstable.
We should not, even at anniversaries, sugarcoat that the United Nations and its principles are not only under pressure, but under heavy attack. Can any country truly sleep in peace if we simply accept that more and more member states, including some permanent members of the Security Council, violate the Charter's core principles? And history teaches us that when so-called realpolitik is confused with appeasement, the result can be catastrophic. So if in future discussions in your parliaments or on TV screens, you might hear that fighting inequalities and climate change, defending human rights, especially women's rights, are outside the core mandate of the United Nations, they might be dismissed as the new vogue. Just not only show them the Charter, but once more, the archival footage. At a time when women were largely absent from formal positions of power, we see a side event led by Eleanor Roosevelt, composed of, actually packed with women. From the early days on, it was crystal clear that peace and security for all would never be achieved if half of society were excluded. So let no one suggest that standing up for all of humanity is not embedded in the very DNA of this institution.
We are here because each person in this room took a decision to get up and do something linked to a vision of a better world and a determination to see that world happen. It's quite possible a future landmark anniversary could be neglected, could be indeed forgotten, if we don't steward the movement of support for the UN and help in each person's way to build a multilateralism for the future rooted in public support. We all know multilateralism is under threat. Deliberate assaults and also the systemic factors that put strain on global politics, whether that's the climate and nature crisis, the AI race and the related competition for critical minerals and energies, to the southwards and eastwards shifts of economic power and the sense of fragility and resentment that this is generating here in the West, where a generation feels worse off than their parents and often angry. And we can channel problems into anger, or we can find a way inspired by the peacemakers of the past and the present, because international law starts with beliefs and it starts with caring.
It has prevented conflicts, resolved conflicts, delivered life-saving humanitarian aid, helped countries grow stronger, fairer, more resilient. No international body has lifted more people out of poverty, protected more lives from deadly disease, responded to more natural disasters, or done more to uphold human rights. The multilateral system from which we have all benefited so much is under greater strain than at any point since 1945. The world has become more complex, more unpredictable. Levels of conflict are the highest they have been in decades. More than 800 million people remain trapped in extreme poverty. Only a third of the Sustainable Development Goals are on track. And climate change, once spoken of as a distant threat, is now destroying lives, homes, and livelihoods. This is not a moment to turn away from multilateralism.
Our aim with this panel is to bring together the sense that international law, defence and security, women's leadership, and peacemaking, these are not different worlds. These are all parts of the same interconnected peace and security that the world needs.
The United Nations wasn't just built out of idealism, although that was certainly one of the motives. It was built out of cold realism. It was built out of a reality that unrestrained conflict could and had led to shared ruin. It was never designed to be perfect. It was designed to be necessary. I think international development and international diplomacy are the front lines that prevent us from being involved in conflict and war.
We women who lived the wars that the Security Council debates went to the Security Council in a global campaign called Women Building Peace. And our message was very simple. The Security Council was unable to deal with the nature of war, with the civil wars that were occurring in the 1990s, the genocide in Rwanda, the genocide in Bosnia. And it was women on the ground who were doing the response. 10 resolutions later, 109 member state national action plans later, and yet 26 years on, those words on paper haven't been fully realized. We face an arms race, shrinking civic space, the crises that you hear about, occupation and genocide yet again. And while the proverbial powerful wage these wars, again, it's the women who take the burden of responsibility. I wanted to take this moment to bring the voices of women peace builders, many of whom I work with, and I wanted to share with you the kinds of things that they've been saying to the Council. From South Sudan and Senegal, women's participation should be a default, not an afterthought. From Palestine, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, women's exclusion is not about culture, it's about power.
WPS is a peace and security issue, and there is data that proves this. Women's participation increases the probability of a peace agreement lasting at least 2 years by 20%. When women meaningfully participate in peace talks, the resulting agreement is 64% less likely to fail, 35% more likely to last for 15 years or more. The challenge that I face in my job to try to predict and understand nuclear risk is so enormously huge and so difficult that I do need the best people I can possibly get. I seek to identify the best talent irrespective of nationality, irrespective of religion, irrespective of age, irrespective of gender, to tackle one of the most persistent and pressing questions of international security today, nuclear weapons and their role in our security. And we heard the Secretary General say this was the subject of Resolution 1, and we have not gotten much further since then.
What does it take for us to solve global challenges? None of us are safe until all of us are safe from pandemics and climate change and conflict and inequality. Over the last few decades, a majority of people in almost every country have said that they agree with international organizations having enforcement powers. But in the last year alone, in over a quarter of the countries surveyed, that has dropped from over a half to less than a half. The public is not retreating from internationalism everywhere. It's really interesting to consider those countries where it is starkly on the rise. China and Saudi Arabia. I believe that the single biggest issue that is eroding trust in our societies across the world is the growth in inequality, and especially in wealth inequality. The extraordinary growth in wealth inequality in recent years has undermined trust in society, and because of that in government, and because of that indeed in international institutions. And of course, many politicians who are unwilling or unable to tackle inequality often blame international institutions as a scapegoat for the anger that results. But ironically, wealth inequality is an issue that can only be tackled by global agreement. Financialized wealth is just as slippery as carbon dioxide and as viruses. So I urge you to give whatever support you can to the UN Tax Convention and also to lend your voices to this issue. Because sometimes the darkest moments come just before the dawn.
Our constituents really do care about the United Nations and international law. I went to visit a scout troop in my constituency in Devon just before Christmas. One of the youngsters, who can have been aged no more than 10 years old, raised his hand during questions. "Are we going to see World War III?" he asked. And it's not only the young constituents who ask the tricky questions. I'm going to quote from a note that I was sent the other day from one of my older constituents. "I'm reaching out with growing national and international concern. As an everyday citizen, it feels very uncomfortable and worrying. This feels like a turning point in history," he wrote, "and so I couldn't shake off the worry without sharing my concerns. It would be great to understand how you and your role supports our views to ensure that the government is acting on our behalf in these matters." The UN reform agenda, UN80, represents an opportunity that the British government should seize so as to be proactive about the future of successful multilateralism and the role that the UK can help to bring it about. All of us have a role in advocating for that.
When I left Syria in 2015, I was told that I would not have the opportunity to continue my studies, and my dreams would remain just that, dreams. But today, I stand before you, having worn many hats, and most importantly, I am a living proof of what happens when refugees are given support, education, and opportunities. International cooperation is the foundation of refugee protection. We must invest in education, job opportunities, and leadership development for refugees. Because when they are empowered, entire communities benefit. And as we mark 80 years since the UN General Assembly first met here, I hope we leave with one message in mind: the future of the UN and the future of human rights will depend on whether we continue choosing solidarity over division.
Wherever you come from, whatever race, nation or creed we arbitrarily assign ourselves to, we all come from a long line of ancestors that were polyglots of nature. Why? Because sound gives vast amounts of information about our world. It can travel long distances fast, not just a single direction like sight, but all around. It's no wonder that the world sings. We're in a climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, there's wars, greed, genocide, colonialism is alive and well, unfettered capitalism, cost of living, depression, anxiety, I could go on, but at the heart of it all, I think we're in a crisis of understanding where we fit on this beautiful tapestry called life on Earth. We've forgotten that it's not just us that are Earthlings, but every organism that we share our home with. The volcanic forest of Waitukabuli, aka Dominica, where half my family are from in the Caribbean, wherever we come from, reconnection to nature is fundamental if we're to have a future on this planet. Planetary health and our health go hand in hand. You can travel the universe and you'll find diamonds, but there's nowhere else but right here that you'll find trees. Yet we cut down trees and covet diamonds. We've forgotten how to be Earthlings because we've forgotten how to listen to our home.
When the visionary characters met here in 1946, they had gone through the greatest planetary challenge of all time. And quite frankly, look, if they were here now, they would find it perhaps hard to recognize. Of course, they would get the conflict, they would get, unfortunately, the genocide, they would get the famine. But would they really understand? I suspect not. Artificial intelligence, would they understand the climate change, and would they understand the biodiversity crisis? Because these are collectively the massive crises of our time. The denialism that we all see, the fact that there is even these rather paltry measures that have been taken so far, deeply inadequate, that there's a rollback against those. And on top of that, we also have, I'm afraid, the savage cuts in foreign aid that have happened in several countries, not least the United Kingdom. But it really does not mean that we've exhausted all the options. If we are able to work in a concerted way, in collaboration and cooperation, internationally, as precisely what the UN is about, there is a chance.
Take the humanitarian and disaster response sector. They have proven adept at not just responding to, but anticipating crises involving multiple risks. We've seen examples of cash transfers before floods hit in South Asia so as to protect households, chlorination of water as cholera outbreaks were spotted. And so we've seen a successful shift from reactive response to anticipatory foresight. I think that these joint needs across countries and regions to address, anticipate, respond to what are planetary scale risks is what will reignite trust in a geopolitically fragmented world. Climate change, biodiversity loss, disease, unregulated technologies, and all of those things you've heard about, they don't know international barriers. And I think that's a huge opportunity, therefore, for common approaches which will help, I think, to regenerate cooperation according to the original UN principles.
194 countries minus one is 193. It's not zero. The Paris Agreement is 10 years old, and it has worked. It's just not worked well enough and for enough people. If we lose the Congo Basin, the Amazon, and the Southeast Asian canopies, your food is insecure. If we cannot find a way to move ourselves to a clean energy system and to cooperate on the minerals and metals that that clean energy system needs, we will not be energy secure. And if we cannot find a way to provide affordable, reliable, and therefore clean, because that is the cheapest, quickest way to provide affordable and reliable energy to the millions of people who still do not have it, then that will undermine the processes of democracy, the processes of peace. It will then spur more conflict, and it will spur more migration. And so that whole conversation about feeling secure again is back to where we start.
We're being hit from all sides, frankly. But let me highlight three aspects. The first one, in 5 years, we have seen a tripling of the number of hungry. And when I talk about acutely hungry, that means that you don't know where the next meal is going to come from. We're now at some 300 million people. I mean, if that was a country, that's a massive country. Secondly, the funding is plummeting. WFP saw a cut of 40% of our funding last year. In Afghanistan, we've gone from assisting some 10 million people to around 2 million people. And we know now during the winter, not being able to be there and assist, children are dying as a result of those cuts. Thirdly, it's never been more difficult or more dangerous to be a humanitarian. I mean, the fact that we have 38 colleagues who are spending every night in cells in Sana, the fact that that is not, mobilizing world outrage is painful to me, and certainly something that keeps me up at night. And ultimately, there needs to be a price, accountability. There is a sense of impunity out there when the rules-based order is fundamentally challenged. We see it on a daily basis. I really call on member states to make sure that there is a price to breach international humanitarian law and the safety of humanitarian. And of course, to apply these principles consistently.
Everyone agrees, I think, or when I go around Wales doing my job, the public are supportive of action to tackle the global planetary risks. They want us to take action to restore nature. They want us to take action to mitigate the impact of the climate emergency. But too often we put this in the category of it's impossible to do. Governments can only look to the next election or the next budget. But what we've done in Wales is put in place a piece of legislation called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The concept is simple, and I talk often about my niece Erin. Well, clearly I want her to have a good life, a good education, a roof over her head today, but I also want her to have a happy and healthy life in 50, 60, 70 years. So this is about embedding an approach to long-term governance and making it part of the everyday culture of decision-making. It was done in parallel to the agreement of the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN level.
It's really no exaggeration to say that the planetary challenges that are confronting us at the moment have never been greater at any point since 1946. And at the same time, the need for support to the United Nations has never been more important.
We've discussed we the peoples, and we've discussed we the planet. But at UNA UK, we like to be ambitious, we like to think big. So now, we're going to take you to space.
Space is going to become a bigger and bigger part, not only of the UN, but of the world as a whole. In just a couple of figures, the space economy is growing at 9% per year. And a McKinsey report recently suggested that it would be worth $2 trillion, maybe more, by 2035. And here in the UK, 18% of UK GDP requires space-based infrastructure. But I thought I'd talk about a more philosophical view of why I think space is important, beyond the economics, beyond the geopolitics. This image is it's a very famous image and linked very closely with the UN, because it's an image, it was the first image taken of the Earth and Moon as a single system in a single frame. It was 1977, the Voyager spacecraft. Now, one of the great puzzles in astronomy, which has become known as the Great Silence, is that hard as we've tried using radio telescopes to listen and look for signals of other civilizations in this galaxy, we have heard nothing to date. If we do find life on Mars, we are sure, or elsewhere in the solar system, we're pretty sure, as sure as we can be, that it will be microbes. It's a big ask for a planet to be stable enough for long enough to support an unbroken chain of life for 4 billion years, which is what it took to make us. We were extremely fortunate. And indeed, I asked a friend of mine who works in this area, how many civilizations do you think that might there be in a galaxy, in this galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy? And he said, well, on average, per galaxy, I suspect the number is less than 1. So that means that it's possible at least that we might be alone in this galaxy. Now, I was asked to give a similar address. It was actually by video at the COP Climate Summit in Glasgow. So my message to them was, you are the world leaders. You are responsible for this place. And given what we know, without things as sophisticated as human brains, there are no thoughts, I would argue there's no meaning. So therefore, if this planet is the only place where complex biology exists, the only place where meaning currently exists, if you destroy this ecosystem, this civilization, through deliberate action or inaction, then each of you will be personally responsible for destroying meaning in a galaxy of 400 billion suns, potentially forever. Have a nice meeting. And so thank you very much for listening. So my hope is, my mission statement for the future of the UN in the next 80 years would be, let's not do that.
The Secretary-General said this morning, the world of 2026 is not the world of 1946, and it is critical that the international system reflects today's reality.
I look out into this room and I see a lot of young people, which is great to see today. The turnout of young people who are not only the future, but who are the leaders of today. And so that's where I'll start. Let me start with intergenerational leadership, because none of us arrived here alone today. I mean, we are literally sitting in history. We are also standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, those who built the institutions, including the UN, and who have held the line when cooperation is under pressure. And that matters, because the tremendous gains we have made over the past 80 years cannot be understated. So intergenerational leadership really means having the humility to learn from experience and the courage to understand and admit when the world has changed, and so do the tools. Reform is about legitimacy, about delivery, and importantly, about trust. Reform has to generate momentum. It has to generate outcomes that people see and feel on the ground because people trust what works. Reform also has to rebalance power dynamics and voice. Who sets the agendas? Who sets priorities? And whose knowledge counts in these conversations? If decisions feel like they're made without people rather than with them, that's a detriment to legitimacy. Future generations cannot be an afterthought when we talk about UN reform. And that's why this moment and who steps into leadership in this moment truly matters.
Listen, we have a situation in which the US abduction of the president of a sovereign country can take place without the UN being able to do anything about it. And so as the UN celebrates, if I can use that word, its 80th anniversary, it has unfortunately become irrelevant in the face of major breaches of peace and security. And it's not just Venezuela, of course, it's Gaza, it's Ukraine, and the list goes on. Major powers are openly threatening nuclear war. Unregulated AI is jeopardizing our collective security. These are challenges that could not have been foreseen by the drafters of the founding document of our international relations, the UN Charter. The rules of the game were set in 1945 before the US dropped a nuclear bomb in Hiroshima, before the internet, before the decline of the power of the nation state in comparison to other actors like the private sector, like civil society. And since then, the UN's membership has almost quadrupled. So the vast majority of countries around the world have not had a say in the architecture of today's system. So I think we really need to ask ourselves, if the UN cannot play a role in situations like these, what is it for? Article 109 of the UN Charter has a little-known provision that allows for the review of this founding document to take place. It was a concession in 1945 to the many countries who were opposed to the permanent 5 members of the Security Council having a veto power. This was a condition for these countries to join. And so if there was no Article 109, we may not have had a United Nations. That's how critical it is. So we're trying to mobilize governments today to fulfill this promise they made 80 years ago, to sit down at the table and negotiate something that serves us better.
I am relatively optimistic because even in the face of a very dangerous moment we are living with flagrant violations of international law, as Heba was mentioning, as well as elastic interpretations of international law, for example, of the right to self-defense that completely disfigure the right to self-defense, or a la carte adherence to international law. Oh, if it's such and such a country that I get along with, I'll pretend that they're not really violating, or, I'll say something relatively vague. If it's another country that I consider an adversary, in that case, I'll be ruthless. All of these types of behavior, I think, are eroding confidence in the system. But just observe every September the number of heads of state that attend the general debate. The moral conscience remains. The instruments are at our disposal. What I think we really need to create is something I call the coalition of the responsible.
80 years ago, people gathered in this very city, in this very building, tired from war, but not tired of hope. They understood something very simple and very brave, that peace is not automatic. It has to be chosen. It has to be built. I do not stand here as a critic of the UN. I stand here as someone who believes deeply in its potential and just as deeply in its need to change and be transformed. Let us treat reform not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Let us judge our work by the lives it touches, not the language it perfects. And let us ensure that the legacy of this moment is not how carefully we spoke, but how decisively we acted.
The United Nations Association of the UK is rebooting and relaunching itself from this month for a period where organisations like us, who care about the UN, need to up our game.
We only benefit from multilateralism if we are willing to show up, sit down, and talk, not walk away.
So as much as the world needs the United Nations today, the United Nations currently needs you. The United Nations Association, civil society, the public, everyone the true believers in multilateralism, to remind all of us in your parliaments, in your governments, in speeches, or via social media every day that the principles of the United Nations Charter are our common life insurance.
The General Assembly, which we celebrate today, exists because of a simple truth. Humanity is strongest when we stand as one. It is up to us, in our capacity as professionals, as voters, and as members of organizations like the UNHCR, to take a stand. More than ever, the world needs civil society movements that are fearless and persistent, that make it impossible for leaders to look away.
Thank you to the United Nations Association UK for highlighting these urgent issues today. And thank you to all of you and to civil society around the world for standing up for multilateralism and international law, especially when the most powerful do not.
Thank you so much to all of you. Go out and change the world.